Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on Proposition 2. We are just thrilled to have you today. I am Tatia Davenport, CEO of CASBO, and we're going to delve into Prop 2, an initiative that promises substantial enhancements to our state's educational facilities for both K-12 and community colleges. Our agenda today is focused and impactful. We're going to first reflect on the funding models, how they've evolved and what Proposition 2 introduces. Second, we're going to discuss the urgent need for modernization and expanded facility support to better serve our students and our communities. And third, we're going to outline the actions that are needed from all of you to ensure successful pass of Proposition 2. As we unpack these elements, our aim is clear, and that is to grasp Prop 2's pivotal role in building a robust foundation for our education institutions. I thank you for being here, and I want to welcome our panel. We have Chris Delehanty from Del Mar Union School District. He is also on our CASBO's Legislative Committee. Sara Slater from Long Beach Unified School District, also on CASBO's Legislative Committee. Rebekah, Kalleen, she's from the Coalition of Adequate School Housing, also known as CASH. Thank you for joining us. And Mishaal, Gill, our own Director of Policy and Advocacy here at CASBO. These are our experts today bringing the conversation forward. I want to let you know that we are recording this for distribution following. And we'll ask that you put your questions into Q&A so that the system gathers that and we can share those back out with the responses as we go. So again, welcome, and I am going to turn it over to our panel. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. So in order to talk about where we're at right now, let's talk about real quickly the last 25 years. So since 1998, the state was successful in passing a bond every 2 to 4 years. And then 2006, to 2016, there was a 10-year gap where bonds were not passed. So when Proposition 51 came about in 2016 and passed, we and facilities were all elated. And then 4 years later, there was still a great need because of the absence of propositions, in between. And Proposition 13 went on the ballot and did not pass for voter approval. So now we get to 2024, 8 years later, and we have Proposition 2 on the ballot for K-12, $8.5 billion. The current status of the school's facility program is there's no new funding. But not only is there no new funding, there's a huge backlog. So the current backlog is $3.8 billion in backlog. And how that breaks down is $2.55 billion in modernization, which currently in the queue, there's 812 projects in the queue. And then for new construction, there's $1.34 billion of backlog, which equates to 189 projects.
Yeah, and I can just give us a little background about how AB 247 ended up becoming Prop 2. So, as we're seeing this year, it is Prop 2, but this process has been going on for the past 2 years. It started in 2023, and finally we were able to see AB 247 evolve into Prop 2 this year. So originally there were two competing facilities measures. One was for the Senate, which was SB 28 by Senator Glazer, and then Assembly had AB 247 by Assemblymember Muratsuchi. So SB 28 was different from AB 247 was because it was K through 12 with community colleges, UCs and CSUs also, and that was $15 billion ask. Whereas for the Assembly, it was just a $10 billion ask for K through 12 and then also community colleges. But it just came back after discussions with the stakeholders. We didn't know until this year, Rebekah, I think maybe even till summer of this year, like which one we will be ending up with. But CASBO had been supporting AB 247 since it was introduced, since the very beginning, and we're really happy to see that it was moving forward. I also like how it says that you can have it all, just not all at once, because there was a $20 billion limit. So Senate actually did end up getting their ask, which is Prop 4 now. That's the climate bond. That's also for $10 billion for wildfires, drinking water, and helping protect our communities. So that's how Senate is right now. That is for Prop 4, but Assembly had their own part with Prop 2. Rebekah, if you'd like to add anything to that, I know you were working a lot with the whole stakeholders groups too.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just add here in the vein of you can have it all, just not all at once. We know that the need far exceeds $10 billion, right? We get about 1.5 billion in applications every year, regardless of if there's funding or not funding. There's, an ongoing drumbeat of need. We know that these projects will continue to come in. And as the conversations were happening in the legislature, we're going to talk a lot more in this webinar about where Prop 2 landed. But there were lots of conversations about what it should look like. Should it fund the current school facility program? Should it fund a new program? Should we have different criteria for accessing the dollars? There's all those policy issues. But then there was also the question of, well, what's the dollar amount that we have available in order to fund a variety of needs? And while we all believe that school facilities are, if not the top priority, a top priority, the folks in the legislature have competing priorities, right? And so they felt constrained in what's been a challenging budget year, as your members all know, to really be very mindful and careful of the debt that we are taking on in this state. And so Mishaal's right. They decided, we've got a $20 billion cap on the amount of new debt that we can take on in this fiscal year, in addition to Prop 1, which was passed in March, and that is the governor's mental health bond. So that 20 billion, it's not a science. This is not based on some finite knowable number. It's really an art. It's what are they comfortable at? And so that 20 billion really became the cap that they were comfortable at. From a debt service standpoint, just a quick note for folks, we're actually in a really healthy position as a state. When we're looking at our debt service ratio, if you're at about 6% of general fund revenue servicing debt, that's really the danger zone. And California is far below that. So in the last fiscal year that we've got numbers for, 22-23, we were at about 3.71% debt service ratio. About 1% of that is to service school facility debt. And when you factor in some of the additional federal payments we were receiving, we're below 3%. So we're really in a healthy range. I think it was just the desire to do more than just one thing in a challenging budget year, being mindful of this being a big election year as well, that our policymakers just wanted to be very careful about how much new debt they were taking on.
So I'm going to go into just a little bit of detail of a Prop 2 overview, and later on in the presentation, you'll hear a little bit, you'll hear more of the dynamics of Proposition 2. But what it did was it protect the current school facilities program, and it ensured that all school districts can participate in the SFP program. And it also included changes to address disparity for local property wealth. But where we landed was a 10 billion, as was stated before, 8.5 billion to K-12 and 1.5 billion for community college. Of that, of our 8.5 billion, 4 billion was for modernization. And remember when I was talking about the backlog before, we were at 2.55 billion. So we're already 50%, even with the 4 billion of current projects that need to be funded. It included 115 million for testing and remediation. And with both mod and new, it reserves 10% for small school districts. And in addition, there's 600 million for career tech education and 600 million for charter schools facilities.
Okay, so just a little bit more overview, and we're going to delve into these things in more detail. But this slide is really meant to talk about the framework, where Prop 2 landed. So as Sara mentioned, we maintain the Successful School Facility Program. That is an ongoing state-local partnership that was created in 1998. So we've had a tremendous amount of success with that program. Continuous improvement, right? You can always improve state programs. I like to joke that I know of exactly 0 state programs that are 100% perfect, and all participants are thrilled with the outcomes, right? But it was really important to stakeholders in the conversations in AB 247 and the development of this bond that we maintain that state-local partnership. And really that we retain the focus on new construction and modernization, especially when we went from 14 billion, which was the ask in AB 247, down to 10 billion, which is what we got out of this process. If you think about adding ornaments to the Christmas tree, you know, lots of specialized asks, pet projects, those types of things. Anything that you fund additionally out of the 10 billion would take away from the core new construction and modernization. So what we were able to do was successfully argue for a framework that says, look, you're going to access the program through a new construction project. You're going to access the program through a modernization project. But if your project addresses key state priorities, then you'll get additional funding in order to do those things. And we'll talk about some of those things in another slide. One thing that's really, really important to understand is the school facility program is a needs-based program. So this is directly tied to your modernization or your new construction eligibility. For new construction, the way that you access the program is you demonstrate that your existing classrooms are not sufficient to house the kids that you anticipate needing to serve in the near future. So you just don't have enough space for those children. For modernization, you have buildings that are at least 25 years old. So it's an age-based facility need. So those are very specific, very needs-based. And so what Prop 2 does is it says all of our eligible projects, all new construction projects, all modernization projects, up until we spent all the money, are eligible. We're not picking winners and losers. We're not saying that some districts are not able to access the money while others are. We're still maintaining that access point through these core eligibility criteria. And what's also really, really important is that no projects receive less funding and some will receive more based on those supplemental grants to address key state priorities. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that sliding scale and what it means to access more based on some of the factors in your school district. But there's additional support as well in there, technical assistance and other opportunities to help those districts that either don't have the local resources to really compete against more well-resourced districts or need some additional support in order to access the program. So all in all, a really wonderful package that's maintaining our funding structure, providing additional funding to some projects, and then also providing support to districts that need it.
I just add too that when we look at this proposition that's coming here, it really aligns with the work that we do on the legislative committee too. And we really work to look at how can we raise all boats. And so this ends up being something that if you're in the school facilities program, you're still in the school facilities program and you can use it the way that you have in the past. But we also know that there are districts that are not receiving what they need and looking at, are there ways that this can start to make a dent in that? And it doesn't go far enough for some districts, I'm sure, but it also starts to make that dent and starts to move us in the right direction. And so really looking at how can we make sure that everybody's being supported and that we're adding that little bit extra to those that definitely need it as well.
And Chris, you remind me that we have another key stakeholder that we had to think about in the development of AB 247 and Prop 2, and that's voters. So we're not operating in a vacuum. This is a general obligation bond. And what that means is that voters in the state of California have to approve it. And so we were very mindful in this process that we needed to meet the needs of school districts, but we also needed to ensure that we were going to meet the needs of local communities and voters. So any type of program that would cut some districts out at the, picking winners and losers, that's something that voters in the state would be less likely to support because we see the need statewide. The other thing is that when we're thinking about a program that might pick winners and losers, that type of conversation is the result of chronic underinvestment in school facilities. So if we're able to continue to provide the funds on an annual basis, again, at about a pace of $1.5 billion per year, which is a pretty modest and reasonable investment, then we're able to get to all of those needs that meet those eligibility criteria. We don't have to pick winners and losers. I represent a statewide association. CASBO is a statewide association. We love all of our children equally, right? And so we want to ensure that we're providing those supports to all school districts. Okay, so this right here, we're sort of, we wanted to show you a little bit. You should all have received your ballots by now. I was so excited when I got mine in the mail. But this is the ballot label. This is what voters will see when they're filling in the bubble on election day, or fun fact, voting started on October 8th. So folks are already returning their ballots. But this looks like sort of very pedestrian language, right? You look at this and you go, okay, it's not really super jazzy. It's not really telling me a lot about this measure. It's telling me about repairs and upgrades, and it's giving me sort of a basic level of information. But what's really important here are a couple of key factors. One is that the language that you see here about authorizing $10 billion for general obligation bonds, et cetera, that is drafted by the Attorney General working with the Legislative Analyst's Office on the fiscal pieces. And that is actually a process that goes all the way back to, well, what's in the language of the law? What's in AB 247? They're not going to put something here in this ballot label that's not reflective of the language that's in AB 247. So we have had a years-long advocacy process to try and encourage the legislature to understand things like voters don't know what the word modernization means. If you read this title and summary, nowhere does it say modernize, even though that's the name of our program, New Construction and Modernization, right? That's because voters, that is an abstract concept. They don't know what that means. They know what a repair is. They know what an upgrade is. If you think about the language that you're using in your local bond campaigns, you talk to voters about things that they understand. They understand an HVAC system. They understand these components that they've got in their own homes, right? And so we worked really hard to ensure that this title and summary would include language that voters understood. The other thing in here is that new this year for 2024, for the first time ever, on our ballots, we've got a list of supporters and a list of opponents. And so we worked really hard in that coalition building phase to ensure that we had supporters that were aligned with us, that were on our side, that were supporting Prop 2, that would resonate really well with voters. So here you see we've got the California Teachers Association, the California School Nurses Organization, and the Community College League of California as the key signatories to this ballot label. And also, when you open up your voter guide to get more information about Proposition 2, they are the signatories on the ballot argument in support of Prop 2. Here we've got opponents, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and we'll talk a little bit more at the end of the webinar about kind of an election and campaign update, but do want folks to know that right now, we need to be prepared for those arguments against Proposition 2. And that's why it's so important to get information out to folks about what Prop 2 does, what it is not, so that we can help to rebut any misinformation that we see in the space as we get closer to Election Day.
I would just like to add on that, the other previous slide is, words matter. Having passed two very successful bonds in the last couple of years, we really paid attention to the words that our voters can resonate, that they can understand, because they are reading this maybe for the first time when they go vote, and it's super important.
Yeah, and this isn't even as jazzy as a lot of the local ballot labels and titles and summary. So we've really worked to try and get some more descriptive language in here. And we'll continue to do that. I mean, we'll just keep pushing that ball forward. But we were really pleased. It looks vanilla at first blush, but compared to past titles and summary, we were very happy with this ballot label.
So Rebekah talked about what Prop 2 is and is not, and it is not Prop 13, which is good for us because Prop 13, not just the unlucky number 13, but the fact that it tied to the original Prop 13 and made people think about property taxes, and nobody wants us to mess with that. And so there was a lot that was out there with Prop 13. It's obviously not March of 2020, which was probably the worst time to try to pass a bond, I don't know, in the last 30 plus years. And it also is a K-14. Prop 2 is a K-14 rather than going through UCs and community colleges, which typically polls lower. And so SB 28 actually had those higher ed. And so I think that there's some benefit to us in having it be just a K-14 school districts and community colleges, and puts us in a good spot. Not included are local bonding capacity increases. As Rebekah talked about, when we look at things like this, part of the formula we're putting in is something that can pass. And while local bonding capacity increases would definitely help some of our local school districts, it also comes as a potential tax increase to community members. And so it could have been a bit of a poison pill for certain people. We do know that bonding capacity is an issue in a lot of districts across the state, but looking at how we can address that in other ways may be the best way to go. And then problematic changes to the SFP application processing structure, really changing the process in a manner that makes it look like there are winners and losers is potentially a process, because when you look at a proposition that has to pass statewide, it's important that you can get voter support from places across the state. And so when we look at Prop 2 versus Prop 13, there are a lot of benefits to the way that Prop 2 is put together, to the pieces that are in Prop 2 that I think set us up for potential success.
And Chris, just to add, to really like hit home on this point, a state general obligation bond, which is what Prop 2 is not a tax increase. So that is so important. Probably one of the biggest pieces of misinformation that we see out in the space. Like if you're on Facebook or Nextdoor, one of those places, in March and February of 2020, there was so much misinformation about that. But what you're doing with the GO bond is you're using the existing tax revenues and dedicating first to pay principal and interest payments on debt. So it's not a tax increase to folks. And in fact, because we're a match program and you use local dollars to leverage those state dollars, it could actually dampen the need for additional local taxes because you're sharing that cost burden with the state.
Absolutely.
So another applicable Prop 2 change is new construction and modernization projects submitted before October 31st are processed and apportioned under the statute as read in January 1st, 2024. Well, those of you who were at last week's cash flow conference, you would have heard OPSC having a different date. And what they stated was it should be submitted prior to October 30th. So that way they have time to look at those applications and you would get grandfathered in. The other talk and concern that districts were having at that was, so should we submit our application and get grandfathered into the old rules of Prop 51? So at least we're in line, because as you know, the program is first in, first out. So that way you're in the queue to be processed. Or should we wait till after that date for the bump if Prop 2 passes? And then another guidance was, well, why wouldn't you submit your application so that way you're in line for the funding, and then you can always resend it and resubmit it with the new guidelines if you are one of those school districts that would get the bump up in the new sliding scale that we are going to talk about in a little bit. Another eligibility baseline is the having existing school building capacity. As many of you know, the state really doesn't know each and every building, what are the needs. And so this is one of those things that is going to help with that. Another new requirement is having a 5-year master plan. And the master plan must include components of the inventory of the existing facilities, site and property, which is important to get what our districts have, right? And the state, again, will be collecting that data to be able to use it hopefully later to see what are the needs of all of our buildings, existing classroom capacities, and projected enrollments, a capital planning budget, and deferred maintenance plan. Now with Prop 51, we already had to have a deferred maintenance plan for the audit, but now this is a component of the 5-year master plan. The guidelines will be developed with the Department of General Services and the California Department of Education. The controller will add instructions to the annual K-12 audit guide to verify compliance. So more to come. We still need to know what is, when Proposition 2 passes, what other things that we're going to need to know about these different components. So more to come on this one.
And there's more to come with what's going to be required, but I just would take a quick moment to mention, depending on where you are in your facilities program, it's really important that you're considering how you're developing a facilities master plan and your deferred maintenance plan and communicating that with your public, because to be able to not just have a state bond, but looking at the funding you're bringing into your district, communicating it out to your public, you really need to be thinking about how you're doing this. I know too many districts who've gone out for a bond, haven't done the facilities master plan, and are waiting until they get state funding, but then it's really hard to communicate to the public what our plan is. And so really having a plan that you can communicate is an important step. And to Sarah's point, there's going to be an auditing process of what's really required to get the funding for the state. So sort of two different things, but as we get that information, you'll be able to marry them together and use that as part of your communication tool, going out with your community and your stakeholders and your board.
That's a good point, Chris. But prior to our last bond, we did a really in-depth master plan, most in-depth that we've ever gone through. And it was because we wanted to see what was our need so that way we can communicate that back. And, they take time and they cost money. So it's something that you should be thinking about now, really.
And I would just like to add that the maintenance in these antiquated facilities is only escalating in cost. And so by having our arms around that story of the escalating future cost of deferring these repairs is going to be helpful as we move forward.
And just one last thing to add on to this is that there are some districts that have not been doing master plans, right? If you're a small school district or even a county office of education, it may not be something that you're familiar with doing. And it may seem like an additional barrier to participation in the school facility program. We're going to try very hard in the implementation of this to ensure that this is not a barrier to participation, and that there are going to be districts that are unique. There are going to be districts that need support in this space. And we've already started to raise those concerns with the Office of Public School Construction, as they'll be working with the Department of Education to develop the regulations to implement this. So please, please, please don't panic if you haven't been doing a master plan. We're going to work to make this workable. Okay, so this slide is meant to give you a little bit of information about that sliding scale that Sara referenced. So one of the great things in Prop 2 is that our state share for many projects is going to go up. And right now for new construction before Prop 2, the state share is 50%, local share 50%. For modernization, it is 60% state share, 40% local. And what Prop 2 does is it creates a new sliding scale. So everyone will continue to receive at least the minimum state share that they already get, that 50% or that 60%. And for some districts and some projects, there will be an increase. So going up to a maximum of 55% for new construction state share, which is really a 10% increase in the state money. Or up to 65% for modernization, which is an 8.3% increase for the state dollars. How do you access this additional potential state share? Well, there is a sliding scale point system. There are 16 maximum points available in this system, and the two ways to generate the most points are by having a high percentage of unduplicated LCFF pupil count. That's up to 8 points out of the 16. And then districts that have a low gross bonding capacity. So those that don't have the same property values as their neighbors and will find it harder to generate the local dollars to bring forward their match. There are two other factors here that can generate some points, though they're lesser points potential than those two prior factors. One is very small schools. So if you've got 200 kiddos or fewer, you get up to 2 additional points. And then projects that use a project labor agreement as well. One thing that I want to mention here on the project labor agreement is in numerous communities in the state, we've seen misinformation about this provision, that we've even seen reporting that says that you have to have a PLA in order to access the school facility program. That is not true. The only place that the PLA is referenced is here, where you might have, if you've got a PLA, it makes it a little bit easier to access that increased state share. And so for projects that have a minimum of 6 out of those 16 points, you'll receive at least 1 percentage point increase in that state share. For those that have more than 10 points, you'll receive the maximum there of the 55 or the 65%. And then a little bit more on funding enhancements, additional dollars that are available. I mentioned that you're still accessing the program through new construction and modernization, but there are additional grants, we call them supplemental grants, that are available to projects that specifically meet certain state policy priorities. And this was a way to our policymakers were very interested, and we are very interested in addressing needs like transitional kindergarten or other needs. But the way that we did it was by protecting and preserving that core new construction and modernization program, and then adding these funding enhancements. So the first one is minimum essential facilities. This is available only for modernization projects. And the idea here is that if you have an older school site, take our typical 1960s school site, that school is going to look very different than a school that was built in the last year or two, right? Our standards have changed, our educational needs have changed. You may lack one of these minimum essential facilities. And so what this does is, if you're already doing a modernization project, you can access additional dollars to build or expand a gym, a multipurpose room, a library, or a school kitchen if the existing facility is insufficient, it doesn't meet the standards, or if it's non-existent. So we're really excited about this because it's going to really change the landscape of some of our school sites in California.
And I would like to say I'm really excited on the multi-purpose room of creating wellness centers at our different spaces, because that wasn't something that was, we talked about the previous 10 years. And then the school kitchen, with now having feeding more students and more breakfast, lunch, and so that is also a need that a lot of districts will use that money for.
And this is really about, equity of sites in different communities, right? A kiddo in one neighborhood should not go to a school that doesn't have a multi-purpose room or a kitchen or a library if the school in the next neighborhood has that. So we're trying to equalize our schools, especially those that are in older communities. Same with transitional kindergarten. So we all know that the TK facilities are insufficient to meet the needs of all of those new 4-year-olds that are going to be on site. They have specialized needs. They have different developmental needs. You can't put them in a standard 960 square foot classroom and expect that they're going to reach their full potential when they don't have access to a restroom, when they're in a space that's just scaled improperly for them. So Prop 2 provides additional funding in order to address those increased costs that are associated with the larger facilities and the specialized facilities that our TK kiddos need. So again, you access this money by doing a modernization project, and if you're retrofitting or building a new TK classroom as part of that project, you will get additional dollars to do that. Important to note here that we don't know at this point how this will be implemented. We don't have a funding formula yet to tell you exactly how those dollars will be calculated. There will be regulations that will be developed to implement this and the minimum essential facility grant. Career technical education. So Sara mentioned at the top that there's $600 million for the Career Technical Education Facility Grant Program. This is in addition to that. So if you're doing a project that has CTE components to it in the modernization program, you can get up to a 5% increase in your state grant in order to pay for those additional costs. This was really a priority of the Senate, and in particular, the Senate President Pro Tem pushed for this. It was not part of the policy development conversation in our stakeholder group. It was something that was added at the end of the negotiations between the Assembly and the Senate in order to meet really the Pro Tem's desire to focus on job training and specifically CTE at K-12 schools. So you'll access these dollars in order to modernize and reconfigure an existing space. You can pay for equipment as long as it's got an average useful life of at least 10 years. And we'll have to see more regulations to implement this as well. The last one on here is the Energy and Climate Change Supplemental Grant. So again, we have a little more information here, up to 5% additional for projects that exceed our Title 24 standards. And those are the Energy Code standards, which are already pretty stringent in California. They get more stringent every year. Sara and Chris know this. That means they get more expensive every year. And so what we're trying to do is provide dollars to help with those projects that are going beyond those standards. And these will be for things that advance state energy goals, that adapt to our higher average temperatures and the extreme heat that we're experiencing in many communities. These are things like HVAC systems, school kitchen equipment, water heating, shade structures, electrification, PV, solar, storage, all of those things that are going to be really important components to an energy efficient space. And then a couple last funding enhancements. That building needs a lot of help there, that picture. I don't think that's DSA approved. So we have additional support for our 75-year-old and older buildings. And what this means is that you can, under the modernization program, replace those buildings, but you'd get the higher dollar amount from new construction, which is about twice the grant that you receive in modernization. Again, a recognition that if you're tearing down an old building and replacing it with a new building, you're going to have some increased costs associated with it. It's more expensive than just a renovation or an upgrade, and we're providing additional dollars to do that. And then lastly, disaster assistance. So not to be doom and gloom, but the news has not been great lately on our natural disasters, and Prop 2 is going to provide dollars to districts that experience a catastrophic event. It's really for interim housing. So if you have to take your kiddos out of your existing facility while you rebuild, while you work with insurance, while you do all of that, the state will pay for the interim housing. The idea here being keep those kids in the community. You don't want them to disperse and go to another community. That creates operational issues. You want them to be able to stay and be educated in their home community. And so Prop 2 is going to help with that.
So I asked AI how many buildings that we have that are over 75 years old. And it prompted me to an article from the Public Policy Institute of California, March 2022, which stated 10% of school buildings are over 70 years old. So that was March 2022. So that's what I found. So part of this schools facility program grants can be used for additional expenditures, and here are some key points. And and Rebekah, you could probably talk too about this, that some of this came out also from policies of advancing state energy goals, and outdoor learning environments from COVID, some of those other kind of things that have happened throughout the last couple years. School kitchens, as we talked about earlier, you know, making them being able to support the students that we have and all the meals that we need to do, transitional kindergarten, facilities for nurses and counselors, seismic retrofits, and broadband access, which is another important thing that we're all have kind of experienced through going online and seeing our networks and what they're doing. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, we're actually modernizing a 50-plus-year-old school with a bunch of seismic retrofit. And so I think your data on a 70-plus-year-old schools, we have even more that are 40 and 50 years old that will certainly need some of that seismic retrofit work. And then I just saw it popped up in the Q&A, the combining E-rate with SFP. We've really worked to combine our E-rate funds with our facilities funds when we're working through modernizations, a lot of stuff with switches and routers and other stuff that we're putting into schools and combining that work. But I think it's intriguing and interesting to look at what we might do as we're looking at broadband access and how we can impact the community as well, how it's going to impact the schools. And so I think as this gets fleshed out, I think there are a lot of opportunities to combine funds and make the biggest impact we can.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris, a lot of school districts do that, right? You're looking at other funding sources, and then that can be your local match for a school facility program project, as long as the work is in your plans. So that's a really smart thing to do, is try to leverage those different funding sources. And maybe I'll just add to Sarah on that use of grant slide that the idea, this is a grant program. So especially on the modernization side, you decide how you want to use your grant. Though as our building codes get more strict and you've got all these things that you have to do when you do a project that eats into the flexible use of the funds, we all know that that's an issue. But in Prop 2, the language, you know, identified all of these things as potential uses of the funds. It's a local choice. You make the decision how you want to use your funds. If you want to use them for these purposes, you are free to do so. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the additional support for our disadvantaged districts. So we talked about the sliding scale, which is really exciting because it's additional funding. And here are some additional ways that Proposition 2 tries to support districts that are less resourced than others. And I do want to just say we have a financial hardship program. And so for districts that have that lower bonding capacity, the way that financial hardship works is it says, okay, let's first look and see if you've gotten eligible projects. Do you have new construction eligibility? Do you have modernization eligibility? If the answer to that is yes, then the state looks at the local dollars that you're able to bring to the table. And as long as you're able to demonstrate local effort, that you have passed a local bond, even if it's not enough to cover your full match, the state goes, that's fine. You've done what you need to do. And the state will bridge that gap. They'll provide up to 100% of the funding for that project. Again, it's got to have eligibility, but this is really a backbone of our program, is that those differences in local property values are real. They create real disparities, and the state then says, we will correct for those disparities. In addition to that, we have new assistance for small school districts in Proposition 2. And that far left column, there's a lot of dense stuff in there. So there's 3 things in there. The first is something that we already have in the financial hardship program, which is, or something that's similar to what we have in the financial hardship program. They're not exactly the same, but this concept of 2-step process to go to the state and get funding first to do your design. Then you go do your design, you go to the Department of Education, you go to DSA to get your plans approved. And then in the second step of the process, you go to the Office of Public School Construction with a funding application to do the construction. Okay, great. So we are now extending that opportunity to small school districts, not just financial hardship districts. But what we're also doing is saying that the construction dollars will be there when you are ready for them in that two-step process. In today's world, pre-Prop 2, if you are a financial hardship project and you do that two-step process, when you get through your design and you're ready for your construction money, there's no guarantee that those dollars will be there for you if other projects have been funded first. And so under Prop 2, there is a protection that says if you are a small school district and you're in this assistance program, that those dollars will be reserved for you. They are available to you when you are ready to move forward on your own time to construct that project. And as Sara mentioned at the top, we're reserving up to 10% of new construction and up to 10% of modernization for those small projects. So something to give so that those districts are able to access funds, even if it takes them longer, even if they need more support in order to get there. There's also additional funding for small school districts for construction management grant of 5% of the state share. And that grant is intended to help with those upfront costs that are difficult for a small school district to shoulder. These are things like planning, site acquisition, pre-construction, and closeout. There's also an expansion of a program that the Department of Education is currently implementing. This could probably be a whole separate conversation, but the Department of Education received $5 million from the federal government in order to implement this SASE grant, so Supporting America's School Infrastructure Grant. And that was targeted at small school districts. So it's still in the process of being implemented by CDE, but the idea here is to provide additional support to small school districts on their school facilities needs. Things like, doing some of that planning up front to know what your needs are, helping them access the school facility program, et cetera. What Prop 2 does is it expands beyond just small school districts and says there are other districts that need help. So these are districts like those that have never accessed the school facility program before, those that have a high percentage of LCFF unduplicated pupils, so a lot of low income kids, those that have low bonding capacity. So we're going to expand that support program. That support program is going to provide things like direct technical assistance, collaboration between counties and specifically county offices of education, the state, and school districts that need support. So like networks of support, centralized online resources. So do you need a template for a document? What does this type of contract look like? What's a model RFP look like? That type of information. And then also expertise on facility maintenance. So Tasha mentioned maintenance and how important that is. So that's going to be an expansion of that program. Lastly, financial hardship, it's going to be a little bit easier to access that program that I mentioned at the beginning of this slide. If you've got local bonding capacity now of 15 million rather than 5 million, you're automatically qualified for that support.
Transparency and accountability has always been an important one with Proposition 51, and it kind of flows through to Proposition 2. So for those of you guys who have been around with Proposition 51, prior to that, there was a district who bought like a mascot uniform out of the SFP funds. And so they with Proposition 51, they wanted independent audits. So with Proposition 2, that continues. We have independent audits. In addition to that, there's a public hearing requirement and some online information that needs to be posted. More to come on all of these guidelines. December 3rd, 2024, Office of Public School Construction will brief the State Allocation Board when Prop 2 passes. This will include the plan for implementation. But this is currently what we're looking at if Proposition 2 passes. Chris, would you like to add anything to this?
Like you said, Sarah, I think a lot of this districts are already doing. We'll get the specifics on what you're doing, but if you have a facilities program, you likely have an online presence, you are sharing information. It might be a little bit that we need to adjust to make sure that we're giving exactly what they're requesting, but I'd imagine that this isn't going to add a whole lot of burden to what districts are already doing.
Okay, so just to close it out, we wanted to give you an update on where we are on the Yes on Two campaign, and an election update. So I serve on the executive committee for Yes on Two. I'm part of the decision-making body there on how we're getting messages out to voters, what's resonating, which parts of the state we're focusing on, etc. We have 21 days until Election Day. It's go time. You may have started to see some of the materials on Prop 2. I got my mailer. I was so excited that I was one of the people that was deemed worthy of receiving the mailer, which goes through some of the needs. We've got Sherry Coburn, who is the executive director for the California School Nurses Organization here, talking about Prop 2. Just can't even tell you how thrilled I was to get this in the mail, because this is an expensive election season. We don't have money to blanket with TV ads. I know we've all seen a lot on rent control. We cannot compete with those folks. So this is a very targeted campaign. One thing that I think is really important is that we also have a historic number of local bonds that are on the ballot this November. So 49.9 billion in local bonds for K-14, that's 267. Many of you here on this webinar are probably pursuing a local bond in November. Good luck to you. I'm so excited for you. That's really transformational for your communities. There is a link here between local bonds and state bonds. In addition to that policy of, you need your local match in order to access the state program, it's also an opportunity to talk to voters about both and the importance of both. So if you are communicating with your voters on your own time, not with public resources, of course, and educating your local communities about your local bond, we have a wonderful opportunity to talk about the state bond as well. So feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is at the end of this PowerPoint, but I'd love to talk to you about collaborating on those messages. We do have a large coalition of supporters. We're so thrilled to be working in partnership with CASBO on Prop 2. We've also got both the California Democratic Party and the California Republican Party. So this is truly a bipartisan measure. It helps kids and families of all stripes. And we're so thrilled to have that. As far as endorsements go, we also are so thrilled that we have had a lot of success with our newspapers and our editorial boards. So we have a yes endorsement from the San Francisco Chronicle, from the LA Times, from the Sacramento Bee, which is actually up and down the state. McClatchy has papers in many communities in California. So we're so thrilled with that. We know that Prop 2 can pass, but you have to get those messages to voters. If they don't know about it, then they don't know why it is so great for their communities and how it can help. There was a question about polling earlier. So polling, again, more an art than a science in a lot of ways, and I've been involved in a lot of polling over the years. The PPIC just released a poll a few weeks ago showing 54% for Prop 2. One note on that is every poll is conducted slightly differently. So you always have to look into what the methodology is there. They had very few undecided voters. I think they only had 2. They don't even have they have a different category when they do their polling. So they had a don't know rather than an undecided category in that poll, which is a little bit of a different way of polling. But 54%, I will take that on election day. We need 50% plus 1 vote in order to pass. I haven't seen anything that's below that, so I'm feeling really encouraged. But again, we have to get those messages to voters. We have over 100 school districts that are supporting Proposition 2 as well that have passed resolutions. So actually, if we could go to the next slide, it bridges really well to that, which is the what can you do to help support Proposition 2? Pass a board resolution. If you haven't done it yet, it is tremendously helpful. This sounds like sort of a ministerial check the box kind of thing. It is not. I cannot tell you how important it is to pass a board resolution supporting Prop 2. We list all of those that have passed on the Yes on 2 website. And you can take a look to see if your district, if you have passed a resolution and you're not sure if the campaign has received it, you can go to the link that I popped in the chat on the yesprop2ca.com. There's a list of our coalition members. If you're still not sure, email it to me and I'll get it to the campaign. I'd rather get it 3 times than not get it at all. we talked a little bit already about that connection between the local and the state bonds. Again, contact me if you're able to do any kind of joint messaging, just educational. You know, here's what we're able to access from the state if we pass our local bond. Here's what we have eligibility for. Here's what we've gotten from the state in the past, so that you can help people understand that this is a partnership. We're going to close out with one comment about social media. So I am not a TikTok girly. I do not understand what is happening around me, but so many of our voters are on TikTok, on Instagram, on X, on Facebook, and we need to talk to them and meet them where they are. So we are encouraging you, again, the link in the chat for the Yes on 2 website, there is a social media toolkit that has been posted there. It's very easy to find. If you go to the top menu, there's Take Action, and under there, there's a social media toolkit. It makes it extremely easy on your own time, without public resources, as your own individual human being, not representing your school district, to go and share messages. They're really beautifully crafted. They've got beautiful images, and they also have the messages that we know resonate best with voters. So take your pick. TikTok, well, TikTok's a different story. You'd have to do a dance or something there. But Instagram, X, and Facebook, we've got those preloaded messages there. Peer-to-peer contacts is how we get this across the finish line. So I like to joke about my father-in-law, who tells me that very proudly that you can call the county assessor to get those school fees off your tax bill. And I say to him, I do not, sir, you do not know what I do for a living. That is the person that we all need to be talking to about Prop 2, what it does and what it doesn't do. So those are those peer-to-peer contacts. True story, by the way, that's my family. But we do need your help. And please vote, and please encourage your loved ones, your friends, your family to support Proposition 2, again, on your own time, your own devices, your own social media accounts as a concerned citizen of California.
All right, Rebekah, Chris, Sara, and Mishaal, thank you for such an informative session. You know, one thing that just is an exclamation mark for me is your comment, this is not a tax increase. I think that's important for the public to hear. I would like to encourage folks, we're going to send out the link to this webinar. And again, from your personal email, share that with your family too. It was just so informative. And really helps bring the breadth of perspective to the topic. So feel free to share this with your close circle of friends and family to help inform them. And then finally, just in closing comments, I think failing to fund our bond is just such a missed opportunity for our students and economic growth in our community. So I hope that this has inspired you to take action, use that toolkit, get that message out, and we'll continue to work with our partners at CASH to keep you informed as this moves across the finish line here in November. Again, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, panel, for all of the insight, and we'll look forward to catching up with you on this important topic after the November election. Thank you.